41 games in the books, a little bit underwhelming. And Paul George finally shut down for the rest of the season. Welcome to the PHLY Sixers Pregame Show presented by Bet365. Download the Bet365 app. Use code PHLY365 when you sign up. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. And every time we say that, it seems like there's something that's just happening with the 76ers to say this has not been an ordinary season for this group. But here we are, Derek Bodner, Kyle Newbeck, Devon Givens, Bree, all of you to jump in. If you have not, and you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean that's a wrap? Paul George officially done for the remainder of the season per the team. He is medically unable to play basketball any further following a procedure where, as part of the treatment plan that he's had, following consultations, specialists with the team, he received injections in both his left abductor muscle and left knee. Again, according to the team, following that procedure, George is medically unable to play and will be out at least 6 weeks. Further updates on his recovery will be provided as appropriate. That is the medical update from the team as of the 6 o'clock hour. And here we are with 15 games remaining. We didn't think we would see him anymore, Kyle, for the remainder of the year.
Before we go down this route,
yeah,
do not look for the starting lineup. I want you guys to blind guess the 5 members of the starting lineup after we go through some Paul George discussion. So if you can hold back, and maybe you've already seen it and you'll just put on a good poker
I have
face.
not. I have not. So it's going to be me guessing?
It's going to be
are we guessing, or are you going to surprise us? Like, are you going to get a reaction?
No, I want you to guess,
okay,
and then I'll do the reveal. But yeah,
right,
more to the point, we'll stick to Paul George.
Deal. And nobody put it in the chat, please, so we can blind guess it, like Kyle said. And we're going to blindly go into the offseason, Kyle, of figuring out what's going on with Paul George, because after 41 games, 16 points on average for the year, 5 boards, 4 assists, an underwhelming year for the all-star forward, the big free agent acquisition for Daryl Morey, and now he's done for the year. Something we pretty much expected it to be.
Oh, yeah.
But now that it's finally done.
For the last week or two, for sure, we've been sitting here saying all the language that we're hearing coming out of this team is – it's the preemptive, we're exploring our options. Oh, we're looking at this. And as they lose and lose and lose and lose, it told you clear as day. They'll say clear as mud, but it's clear as day to us. He was going to be done for the season. I don't mean to laugh at it. Obviously, it's not been the season he wanted or hoped for coming here. And I could see, and Derek, you can speak to this as well, being in the locker room and talking with Paul and seeing Paul after games, you could tell over the last, let's say, month or so that it had very clearly gone from still being optimistic, still trying to, put your best foot forward, make the best of the season. Hey, we got the talent. Hey, we got this, to he was very clearly and visibly beaten down by the season that they had. So he was one example among many of the toll that this season took on everybody in that locker room. It's taken a toll on all of us, obviously, having to. And unfortunately, /fortunately, happy to have this job, but unfortunately, we can't be ruled out for the season. The show goes on. We're still here watching these games with insane lineups and losses galore. But I think back to that night and the morning when they signed Paul George, and the next day we woke up and talked about, look, there's some risk and there's downside, and you hedge against all the crazy optimism. But end of the day, it was, this guy's a really skilled, really talented player. He's 34, but 34 now in the NBA. It's not like, oh, okay, grandpa, go to bed type of age. So there was reason to believe that this guy was going to come in, play next to Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, and be ultra productive. And he played 41 games. He had his worst scoring season since he had basically lost season in 2014-15. Yep. And the worst scoring season he's had in a real year since he was a 21-year-old second-year player in Indiana.
The most improved player.
Yeah, so we're talking about, this is over a decade since he's had this bad of a scoring season. He had, I believe, probably the worst 2-month shooting stretch that he's had in at least 5 years, right? He was shooting low 20s from 3 for long periods of time. And everything that could go wrong went wrong. Shot bad, couldn't move as well because of the knee issues early on, and maybe can't move as well as he needs to, just point blank, period. Joel Embiid's not healthy, so he doesn't really get to be the third guy playing off of the two main stars. He has to be more of the co-star with Maxey, and was overwhelmed by that role. His lack of playmaking hurt more because, or at least competent playmaking. He certainly, his assist numbers were okay, but he's turning the ball over and making goofy mistakes. All his flaws and all his weaknesses as a player were put on display tenfold because of the situation around him. So I would say on just about every level, a colossal failure of a first season for Paul George in Philadelphia. And you have to hope, if he's going to stay around, that the best is yet to come, because if it doesn't get better than this, it's going to be a long 4 years, or 3 more years, I should say.
Yeah, it really is. Like, he came out, missed the first 5 games with the bone bruise, re-suffered an aggravation of a bone bruise a couple games later. Finally looked like he was getting some kind of rhythm there in late December and January, and then boom, gone. You never really got to see him play extended minutes with your core 3. You never got to see him play extended minutes when he's seemingly healthy. And you're sitting here now with a player who's going to be 35 next year, and you've got to try to judge, well, how much does he have left in the tank? How much of what we saw, like Kyle mentioned, worst scoring season basically since his second year in the league, not counting that short 6-game stint back in 2014. But how much of that decline is because of those, injuries that are, acute injuries that shouldn't necessarily linger, and how much are because he is 34 going on 35 and lost a step and having to navigate that. January should give you some hope, but it's like everything else with this team. So many things have to go right for you to reach that level. You might have a prayer, but you shouldn't have any confidence. And it's just such a tough, he is obviously not going to be the primary reason whether or not they are, I don't even want to use the C word, whether or not they are competent. I'll use a different C word, competent next year or not. That is going to be Joel Embiid. But he is a big factor of raising their ceiling if they do get to that baseline back with Embiid coming back. And you just don't know what to expect. Like him shooting 35% this year, give him, all of the things he has struggled with in terms of staying healthy, maybe a drop in first step, yada, yada, yada. He was still shooting, high 30s, low 40s year after year after year after year. The way he shot the ball in the first couple months of the season was perplexing. And then you add in the injury concerns, and it's just a lost season.
He's supposed to produce winning too, and being out there with Maxey a lot this year in the 41 games that he played. Derek, you talked about the month of January where he had his best month, and he averaged at 20 points, close to 6 boards, and just under 5 assists. He played really well in that month. The problem was they had a 3-7 record in those games. So you're still supposed to produce winning when you have your star player playing like that and playing alongside Tyrese Maxey. And when we spoke about James Harden a little bit, just look what he's doing with Los Angeles. And I was even on Anthony's show this morning and talking about he's generating winning. And we saw that when Embiid was out and James Harden and Tyrese Maxey were together, they generated winning. And although they had the great month of December where they went, 9-2?
It's a real damaging month now.
Well, it's a damaging month.
We need those wins back.
Yeah, 9-2. And he averaged 16.
Can the NBA investigate that month?
Investigate that month.
Maybe rescind a few wins.
Right. Yeah, some issues going on there. He averaged 16 and they won some games there, but it didn't translate into wins with the overall there following up in that month. Maybe you can look at it and say some harder games, but they had some pretty good wins there in the mix of that month. And I don't know if you guys checked this out, but I just laid that out about each month and what the record was in his 41 games. I know you were going to write a story for allphly.com. You're probably going to write some things too, but do you know his record with the Sixers this season in those 41 games?
I do not.
Derek?
It's not good.
16-25.
It is actually 15-26 on the season through those 41 games. And you signed him to be better than that. And we know that Embiid was not there. He has been battling, which he is out for the remainder of the year with this knee, but you needed certainly needed better. I was not in the locker room with you guys.
Nice 30-win pace.
That's a nice 30-win pace for that amount of money that he made this year on that $212 million deal for over 4 years. Let's see what he does for an encore in year number 2, with what's next. But Yeah, very underwhelming, very disappointing. And we gave him the leeway early because, hey, man, you buckle your knee, you have a bone bruise, you hyperextend it. That's tough in the preseason. You follow that up 2 weeks later and do it again when you get back. And that's not easy to play through. And once he got his legs underneath him, he still did not look like the Paul George that you thought you were getting as we were all breaking it down and analyzing it in the offseason. And that's why things are so disappointing.
But I'll say this, Devon, building off of that. I think for me, the most disappointing thing about Paul George's season is not that he got hurt, right? Like you can't control suffering injuries. And people will say, well, he had a pinky injury and he missed these games. So like I saw his hand and I understand your hands are very important when you're playing the game of basketball. He tried to battle through injuries. He tried to put himself out there and be available for the team, even when he's not performing, right? Like he certainly wasn't helping his Q rating in Philadelphia. It was just, I'm trying to be out there, trying to help the team. But what really killed me, what really stuck with me as we got deeper into this season was he very clearly just stopped playing aggressively on offense, right? If you go back to that preseason game they had, who was it? Minnesota, I think they played. It was the one that it was a weird broadcast that was hard to, but he had a really good start to his Sixers career. It was his first appearance, and he's coming out hunting shots. He's trying to take the ball and seize the game. Phoenix in the regular season, early in the season, they're on the road. He comes back from injury. He's jumping into a new team in a real game for the first time. Maxey and the other guy, Yabusele was cooking. Maxey's cooking. You know who wanted the ball at the end of the game? Paul George. Paul George said, screw you. Get out of my way. I want the ball. I'm going to try to hit the game-winning shot. Now, we criticized him for not having the presence or the sense of the moment to say, hey, I don't have it going right now, right? Like I have to defer to other people, and it's my first game back. I'm not in a rhythm. Let somebody else have the offense, have the shot. But I at least understand and respect the mentality of like, I'm a $50 million player. I'm here for a reason. You signed me to do things like this. And I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the games and figure out where I think the delineation mark is. But there was a clear moment where it went from I'm engaged, I'm invested in this season, and I'm going to be one of the guys on this team to just, I'm just kind of happy to, whatever happens to us happens. I'll be out there. I'll be a participant. And you can't say that I didn't try to put myself out there. But you go into the All-Star break with that clunker in Brooklyn where you had what? 2 points?
Yeah.
And that's what I come back to is as the season wore on, as times got tougher and tougher and tougher, and they needed him more than ever, he completely shrank. And that's something for me that's hard to understand or forgive him for. Like that, if he goes out and shoots 9 for 28 and they lose, like, okay, is that good? No, but at least the guy that you're paying $50 million is trying to do something. Instead, it just felt like he's floating through this game as if he's a role player, and that I can't get down with.
And that'll be my lasting memory, that Brooklyn game going into the All-Star break, because that's basically laying out exactly what you said. They needed something going into that break. They had 2 games that were winnable games. I believe it was the Raptors the night before. And then the Nets lost the very next day. So that one right there, those 2 games, him doing what he did, that's the one that's going to stand out for me. And we have months to go. But that's the one that's going to really be etched in stone in my mind of how he did not do enough. And they were in that game. And we already knew where the Nets and the Sixers were within the standings and how, hey, man, we were still talking about them playing in the play-in tournament and winning some basketball games. And he had a 2-point performance, and that's the one. Now, look, I'll remember the injury in Atlanta in the preseason. I'll remember the Phoenix game where he took over. Ultimately, we were killing him at the time. Derek, to your point, that was a good loss now because that was an extra loss on their schedule. But I'll remember that. I'll remember him having the 29-point game against the Knicks in the first matchup that he had with Joel Embiid when Maxey missed that game here in Philadelphia. But the one that's really going to get me is that 2-point performance. Yes, the pinky was a problem, but he was out there. They needed a win badly to snap that streak going into the All-Star break. Then they eventually come out of the All-Star break and lose more games and really, really bad in those performances. And it just kind of tailed, man. Just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing with Paul George all season. But that Brooklyn one, Derek, is going to stand out for me.
Yeah. See, I'm still of his finger. I think he had lost so much confidence. Like that to me was being passive because I don't think he trusted necessarily his ability to even handle the ball with his left hand. It was really the season in totality. He just never at any point looked like he had an imprint on the game the way that we were expecting. And again, it's completely different because you're expecting him to be a third option for most of the season who could occasionally step up and be a second option, but for the most part would learn how to play off of Embiid. Notably, he didn't look like he learned how to play off of Embiid all that well. They didn't get a lot of time, so you don't want to hold too much against them. But the shot never really materialized, and the threat of that off-ball shot never really materialized like you were hoping it would. And if you have one tiny bit, I don't even want to say it because it all predicates on Embiid coming back. But if you have one tiny bit of next year being better, I do expect the shot to be better. I do think he will make shots, but none of it really matters if you don't have that dominant force inside. And that really is the crux of this whole conversation, the crux of this whole situation that the Sixers are in. It's impossible to truly have any kind of belief in the core, which is terrible to say. Like you really just go back to July and think of how everyone was. And it's real easy to sit here in retrospect and be like, this was obviously not going to work. Too much of an injury risk, too old, yada, yada, yada. If you go back and you look at those chats and the reactions, even leading up, I remember when we were talking about Paul George in May and people were like, let the whole Paul George thing die. It's not going to happen. He's not leaving LA. The cap space isn't going to work out. And for the most part, cap space is a tough way to add to a team like that. A lot of things have to go right, and this really shows you, it's risky. Like people like Paul George leave because there's some level of risk. It's just like if Paul George was 27 and injury-free, he's not leaving in free agency.
Right. The Clippers would have handed him a 4-year, 5-year max, and it's it. Yeah.
I think when we look back on this era, it's always going to come back to like, should they have just given that money to James Harden? And that was terrifying. I didn't like that idea at all. But I think it probably, looking in retrospect, was the way to go.
Yeah, I think so. I think at the time I was higher on it than most people, but even then it was like, I've watched James Harden's career the same way everyone else has, right? I see a player who had many of the same pitfalls that they kept running into, right? As a guy who's a great regular season player, has put up crazy numbers, also slid into a nice role next to Joel Embiid, helps him get to the next level, helps Tyrese Maxey graduate and get to that next level. But when the chips are down, when you really need it in a game 7 or a game 6 in the Miami series case, it's like, where is this guy? What is he doing? And that's not to diminish. He won them 2 games of that Boston series. And I certainly respect what he did to at least give them a chance. But I understood the skepticism, even though I think I was a bigger believer in that team and that kind of group of players than 99% of the fan base. And frankly, like 99% of just people in general, because I saw so many things happen that season that just felt like this is the graduation year. Like you can see them taking a step forward in the types of teams they can beat, their ability to play without Embiid on the floor and win minutes, like the Christmas Day game I always go back to, Harden and Niang, Harden having what was he, like 11-5, I think they were without Embiid that year. The Milwaukee game where they have the big comeback on a Saturday night national TV game. Like there are lots of moments where you felt this is finally like a real contender.
It's the only time in his career he played with an elite half-court shot creator.
Yeah.
And I say half-court because Ben Simmons, for all his fault, was an elite passer. He was just much better at creating an advantage in transition. That was the one time in Joel Embiid's career, for a season and a half, he played with forget even elite, an above-average half-court shot creator.
Yeah. So I just, that was the decision, and I think that is the decision that if you go back, if you want to say they should have gone that route, that's where I can get on board. I think there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking where people are like, well, they should have done this, they should have done that. Well, give me an example of what that plan looks like. Like I know our colleague Vince loves to, he's a proponent of they should have this summer signed short-term deals, like giving the guys 2-year deals for maybe and you split up Paul George's money. He's brought up Chris Paul, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I know DeRozan is a name that was a possibility, so on and so forth. And like there are if you have your perfect options that you put together, maybe you save the short term. And there are other people who say, well, you should have tried to make a trade in the middle of last season, like get younger guys, go push picks in for somebody. Like, okay, well, one, you have to tell me who that is. It can't just be just an amorphous concept of a young player. But then you're also talking about you're still in the same position, right? Basically. And you're in a worse position because Joel Embiid's knee is still bad and is still problematic moving forward. And you've also probably given up multiple first-round picks in order to get the younger talent, the other guy. And maybe it's easier to do a soft reset and retool and all that, but there just have not been many foolproof opportunities. There never are foolproof opportunities, but I don't know what the opportunities are that they passed up on that I'm like, boy, they really should have done that one in the last 2 years or so.
Yeah, that Harden one is really going to come back now, especially once they get into the postseason and he has some moments and he and Kawhi Leonard and Norm Powell, they do whatever they do in the playoffs in that moment. We'll be sitting back watching them because the Sixers not playing and Paul George is the one that is the recipient of it.
It's also just wild that the one move that's going to come back to bite him the most, and the Embiid extension is a different conversation, but the one move is that the guy that we're all concerned that he would be overly
attached to.
Yeah, and like to the point of not being able to accept reality is the one guy he tried to strong arm and got himself into this position. It's just a wild twist of fate.
And the other side of that is like if you're someone who was on the Harden side or you're even just being Captain Hindsight, the easiest thing to say is like if your whole reputation as an executive, and that's not fair to Daryl, but if a lot of your reputation as an executive is based upon your evaluation of James Harden, your relationship with James Harden, and you incorrectly read where he was at and where he was going, like that's a huge blunder, right? And to end up here where you still end up with a mid-30s star, guy with health concerns or question marks, spotty injury history, similar questions in terms of the playoff success, right? It's Paul George has had moments, yes, but broadly like has not been able to get it done when it matters. It's like you ended up in a very similar situation anyway, which is super, super unfortunate.
And when we start going that way, we start to think about, well, what could have been done with those three. Of course, we saw it. We saw it in the postseason. We saw that they can win together. They didn't get it done in Game 6 and Game 7 against Boston. But you have your backcourt. You have your big man. Who are those next two starters and building the rest of the roster out as you go into the offseason with any potential money and all that stuff? Yep. That's where we start to really go into it of, damn, maybe they could have gotten this 4 or this wing to go with them, and then the bench will look like
just
this.
Just not P.J. Tucker would
just
be
not
because
PJ
who
Tucker.
Couldn't move.
Right, yeah. So even though he probably would still be here just because of the relationship.
Hey, he's a free agent, isn't he?
He's with the
Wasn't
Knicks
he bought
right
it? Oh,
now.
he did sign? Okay.
He signed with the Knicks now, yeah. So he's sitting on the bench.
Somebody
10-day contract.
I don't mean to laugh at PJ, but somebody put together a really funny. It was like a PJ Tucker Knicks debut highlight reel, and it's him on the bench like.
He's happy.
Like,
listen,
good for him.
Look, he got the most out of what he had to offer. A lot of
and
props.
look, I like and respect PJ a lot. Yeah. Like was a ultra competitor his whole career. Having the career that he has or did, is insane when you consider the limitations he had as a player. But yeah, that was, and again, but that's, everyone likes to be the Monday morning quarterback. When they signed PJ Tucker, it's coming off of a series where he kicked their ass for like the whole series. And your star
player was like, we need PJ Tucker.
Joel Embiid was like, get that specific guy. So the consensus move, we're learning, Paul George, PJ Tucker, whatever it is, not always the way you want to go. Maybe that's the lesson here.
Maybe it is.
But being a contrarian, also not always the right way to go. And I say that as a contrarian.
Yeah, so look, and we really didn't get into much of what's next. So even though we had it there, we just kept going on and just discussing so many things because there's so many legs to this whole Paul George thing. Maybe that'll be something we discuss in the very near future. We have a 3 p.m. show tomorrow, so I'm sure Paul George's name will come up tomorrow in our conversation.
I would imagine so.
So we'll get into what's next with Paul George, because post-game we will talk a lot about what happened in-game and so forth. So we'll get into more of what's next for the Sixers.
I need your guesses on the starting five.
All right, so we're going to take these.
So I think Butler, obviously. Quentin, obviously. Justin. Ricky.
Who's the fifth?
We were talking about this before the show, and we thought Alex Reese. It can't be, because that would be obvious. You wouldn't have been making a big deal out of it.
Correct.
That's wild.
Devon.
That's
It
why.
took me out when I saw. So Bree now has it up on the screen. Thank you to super producer Bree. When I saw the post, I was like, first of all, his handle is Brissy. That's what we're rolling with here. But then also like, oh wait, he's the center. Or maybe Ricky's the center. Like I actually don't know who they're expecting to be the nominal rim protector here.
Don't foul out, guys, with playing against Alperen Şengün tonight, because that's going to be an adventure if you do foul out tonight against that guy, that front court. Tari Eason out there also, Steven Adams. Don't foul out, because we're going to get a lot of the used minivan tonight if that is the case.
I suspect it's going to be a lot of Matador Olay type of defense.
Let him go.
So
yeah, just kind of let him go. O'Shea Brissett. So this is now the 43rd different starting lineup for the Philadelphia.
I think it might be
76ers.
44.
44?
Is it 4? It's
Let me
one
check.
or the other.
Let me check.
I have to double check.
I did write it down last time, so you are correct. It's 44.
I knew it was one of those. So you made me second guess myself.
44. 44th, folks. Different starting lineup. And I think that matches their total. What's their losses? 44 or 45?
44. Yeah, 44. For a couple
Going
more
for
hours.
45
44.
tonight,
45 tonight in this one against the Houston Rockets, who have won 6 games in a row, by the way. Once again, they are fighting for a top spot in the Western Conference playoffs. So, folks, they were off. This is not going to be easy tonight. So if you are Bet365, which we will get to here in a second, make sure you go and take advantage of that anytime 20 points. You might
some alternative lines on this game. Boy.
You might want to put that one on your list for tonight. The Rockets are tied right now with Denver and Memphis for the number 2 seed behind OKC in the West. Let's get to our pregame picks here on the pregame pick segment, brought to you by Bet365. Use code PHLY365 when you sign up. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I would love, Derek, to go back and look at my picks with Paul George in the pregame picks and see exactly what he did to help us or not help us in these in general. But what we have tonight, we got to go with Quentin Grimes, right? He's on a roll. 21.5. They boosted it now. He was around that 16.5, 17.5. Now he's up to 21.5. I went with the over.
I can't believe you didn't pick some kind of Rockets point spread or money
I was
line
thinking
on
about it,
this
but I was
one.
like, you know what? I'll stay away from it. I'll just go with Grimes with the 21.5. I was close to picking Şengün's points, rebounds, and assists, but it was kind of high. Don't know how many minutes he's going to play. So I went with the simple rebounds, 11.5. Who's rebounding? Who's stopping him from rebounding the ball tonight? That's why I went with those two.
Ime Udoka when he pulls them from the game when they're already up 35
Right.
points.
That's
who's
boosted.
stopping them.
That's a plus 275. And if you want to boost it with a third leg on the parlay, you get a 30% profit boost at Bet365. Once again, download the Bet365 app. Use code PHLY365 when you sign up, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 plus and physically located in Pennsylvania. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and indeed wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Looking at the spread before we sign off, as you just brought that up there, Kyle, I am going right now, 17 is the spread right now in favor of the Rockets in this one.
You could talk me into a much higher line than that. So
if you want to do that and add that to the parlay, Bet365, our presenting sponsor here on the pregame show and the postgame show, which we will be back for later on in the evening after this game is done. I'd imagine it's going to be a quick game, so be ready for postgame once we get started. For Derek Bodner, Kyle Newbeck, I'm Devon Givens. For Bree as well, we'll be with you after the game. We got a lot to talk about with this one tonight, we think. We'll see what happens. O'Shea Brissett starting at center. Whew. 44th different starting lineup. We'll talk about it after the game here on the PHLY Sixers postgame show presented by Bet365.
all silly like the mayor.